Kamotho Waiganjo.
And the advocate representing CRA in the Supreme Court case.
In the Supreme Court. Hey, Lawyer Kamotho Waiganjo.
Good morning, sir. Good morning. How are you?
We are fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well.
Nduoko is also in the studio. Say hello to her.
Odo, how are you?
Good morning, Kamotho. How are you?
Very well, very well.
Good. Now, Kamotho, this very good opinion that came out of the Supreme Court, and Wanjiru has just given us the background of what was happening, how the Institute for Social Accountability went to the High Court, how the Council of Governors themselves went and sought the advisory from the Supreme Court. Just tell us, what did the Supreme Court say?
The Supreme Court made a decision at three levels now, on the basis of the issues that had been brought to it. I think it's important to keep emphasizing the background, because sometimes the technical aspect of it, the legal aspect of it, sometimes the effect of the misuse of the Constitution, because that's what's been happening. The effect of it is not always obvious to the public. What's been happening in the last, since we started the process of devolving, is that because the process has been abused primarily by the national government, National Assembly, and the Treasury, is that effectively monies that are allocated to county governments have been going down. If you look at the allocations from 2013 as a proportion of the revenue that you collect, which means we are talking about effective allocation. So that if you look at 2013, I think the county governments were allocated something like 23% of the revenue that we collected. By last year, that figure had gone to about 17%. So increasingly, the amount had been, even though the actual numbers look to be increasing, in relation to the amount of revenue and the size of our economy, the allocations to county governments have been going down. And the reason for this has been primarily because of these defects. Because the truth of the matter is there are some contradictions in the Constitution, and that is what the Supreme Court was asked to resolve.
Okay.
One of those is that issue that I think is the issue which you talked about just before I came in, which is about the fact that the way our Constitution designs a public finance process, it appeared to allow for the national government to do an appropriations act, an appropriations bill and an appropriations act before they had been allocated money. What is the effect of that? Because county governments don't have the same powers, the county governments have to wait for the division of revenue bill to be passed into a law, and then what is called the County Allocation of Revenue Act is then passed. They cannot be able to appropriate any money before those two acts are passed. Which means that if the financial year ends and Parliament has not agreed on the division of revenue, county governments have no money. The national government, however, continues to spend. So what it means is that there is no incentive whatsoever for the National Assembly to agree with the Senate on the allocations to counties. What they do is they just wait out. Once the financial year ends, counties start to get desperate by July. By August, people are saying whatever is available on the table, just give us. Because by that time, people are demonstrating. There are no services starting. People are having to depend on your local revenue. So that has been one of the problems. Don't forget, however, there's another problem that people don't see. The national government, what is called the national government, CDF, is based on a proportion of the amount of money allocated to the national government. What does that mean? The members of Parliament have a perverse incentive to ensure that as much money is allocated to the national government as opposed to the county governments, because the more money is allocated there, the more money is available for CDF, because it's a proportion, I think it's 2.5%. So if the amount of money increases every year, then the better for CDF. So those are some of the problems that have been there. Now, what the Supreme Court said on that question, they said, look, by the end of, before either the national government or the county governments can appropriate any money, the respective allocations for each level must be known. because you must know what you are appropriating. When you are budgeting as a national government, what are you budgeting? Who told you that is the amount of money that you are entitled to?
Yeah.
So everybody must wait for the division of revenue. The advantage of that, Eric, is that it means that the National Assembly now and the national government have an incentive to settle the question of the division of revenue before the end of the financial year.
Yeah.
Because everyone now suffers if the allocations,
if there's no agreement, nobody will move.
If there's no agreement, everyone suffers.
Yeah.
Now, there's another limb to the decision of the Supreme Court. Actually, there are two others. The other one, they said, wait a minute, in any event, if there is no agreement by the end of the financial year, county governments are entitled also, because they also provide services to Kenyans. County governments are entitled to 50% of the money that they were allocated last year. They're also entitled, just like the national government is allowed to collect 50% pending an agreement on the budget, county governments are also entitled to 50% of the money. What that means is that the way county governments have now been punished before by being made desperate so that they can take whatever pickings are available, that option is not available. That is a very important development in terms of equalizing the negotiating powers between the Senate and the National Assembly on the monies allocated and available to county governments. So that for me, so those were the two major decisions that were made. But there's a third one, which was that until now, the question was, what happens if the National Assembly and the national government and the Senate do not agree on the division of revenue within the timeline? Suppose the financial year ends, they have not agreed, 50% is released, they don't agree, what happens? And the Supreme Court said, listen, in the Constitution of Kenya 2010, the Constitution had said that law that is supposed to be passed, the implementation laws that are supposed to be passed within the 5 years must be passed, and if they are not passed, any citizen can petition the Chief Justice for the dissolution of Parliament. And they said this is an implementation law. The division of revenue is an implementation law. If this law is not passed within the timelines that the Constitution, any citizen can petition Parliament, can petition the Chief Justice for dissolution of Parliament, and the Chief Justice, following the provisions of Article 261, can order the dissolution of Parliament. That again is an important sword of Damocles of our Parliament. There are procedural problems, but I fear that. Don't forget, and because I sat in the CIC, one of the fears that parliamentarians had was the possibility of dissolution, however remote the possibility. And so just having it there is very, very important.
It's an incentive.
We are not all helpless. It's a very good incentive. So what we are saying is that the Supreme Court in the last so many years has made some very progressive decisions in terms of ensuring that the spirit of devolution is affirmed. Now, the next part, of course, is compliance with those decisions.
Of course.
But I think the place to start is to say the decisions are there.
It's actually good to hear that. Kamotho, we have very many questions out of this. And just please stay on the line. Let's do weather and then come back and start now the questions, shooting questions left, right, and center. Good morning. We are speaking with Kamotho Waiganjo. He is a constitutional expert. He is a lawyer who participated and represented the Commission for Revenue Allocation in the just concluded petition in the Supreme Court, and that's what he's telling us about. But also, Kamotho Waiganjo was a member of the Commission for the Implementation of the Constitution. So when you talk about the Constitution of Kenya 2010, this man can actually recite it for you from the first page to the last schedule.
And he was responsible for the Committee on Public Finance.
There you go.
Yes, I was.
Hey. Keep it right here. 19 minutes after 7. This is A Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation.
cloudy in Nairobi. 16 degrees is what we are at currently. Highs of 25 and lows of 12. Taking a look then into Nyeri, where the showers have already started coming down at 16 degrees. It'll be a wet day and into the weekend with highs of 23 and lows of 13. Nakuru at 15 degrees is mostly sunny this morning. That'll change to showers later with highs of 24 and lows of 13. It's partly cloudy conditions in Eldoret at 14 degrees. We'll see highs of 22 and lows of 12 with showers leading all through till Monday. Kisumu at 20 degrees is mostly cloudy. Rains expected later with highs of 28 and lows of 19. Kakamega is following suit with cloudy conditions at 17 degrees this morning, but that will change in the afternoon and it will be a thundery weekend in the western town. Malindi at 27 degrees is partly cloudy this morning. Highs of 29 and lows of 25. In Mombasa at 26 degrees is mostly sunny conditions. They'll prevail for most of the day with highs of 30 and lows of 24. Taking a look then into Kampala, where at 21 degrees it's mostly cloudy. Rains are going to make their debut in the afternoon with highs of 26 and lows of 19. Dar es Salaam will be partly cloudy through all the day, entering into the weekend with highs of 31 and lows of 22. Johannesburg at 6 degrees is going to be clear skies but chilly conditions, highs of 18 and lows of 4. And we'll wrap things up in Lagos for now, where it's 24 degrees and clear skies with a few clouds, highs of 32 and lows of 24.
Twenty-two after 7. This is a situation in the room. We have Eric Lati. On the line is lawyer Kamotho Waiganjo, constitutional expert. So we've got questions. Who goes first? There's consensus. So I'm asking the first question out of consensus, Kamotho.
That's okay.
The role of the Commission on Revenue Allocation in this whole process. We understand that the CRA gives some advice to the Treasury or to the national government. Is this supposed just to be advice? Should it be heeded? Is it binding?
Good. Now, again, going back to some of the dysfunctions in our constitution, and the CRA in the initial design of the constitution, if you look to previous designs until the draft went to Naivasha and came back with some challenges. The institution was supposed to be a fairly strong institution, and that is why it is given security of tenure. That is why it comprises the various political, it comprises of members who are appointed by the major political party and the minority political party. The Treasury sits as a substantive member. The reason for that, it was supposed to be the professional body in which these political questions are negotiated, but with the technical input.
Yep.
Unfortunately, when the draft left Naivasha and came back, the powers of the commission were so reduced. So you are left with a very strong institution, but whose views are not different from those of the Association of Bloggers. They can be dismissed at any time. They go to parliament. They don't mean anything, and one has to see that there's a contradiction. There's a problem. Why would you need to create an institution like this? Spend money on it, give security of tenure to its members, and its opinions don't count for anything. So one of the questions, unfortunately, the Constitution itself allows for Parliament to depart from the views of the Commission. The Constitution specifically allows that. Now, one of the questions that was there before the Supreme Court was, in what circumstances can that departure be constitutional? Now, the court discussed that matter in length and eventually said that the views of the Commission, while not binding, must be taken into account. There must be evidence that the views have been taken into account and that they've been considered in the process of determining the ultimate allocations and on other financial questions. That again is an important finding, because what it does, it means that if you're going to move away from the recommendations of the commission, then you need to show that there's a constitutional, it's not just that you have a different view, but there's a constitutional basis for moving from those grounds. And I think that was important in affirming the role of the commission. One, in recognizing, yes, their views may not be binding because ultimately division of revenue is a political process, but their views are not just, to be dismissed. So that was an important aspect. Yes.
Kamotho, it's very difficult to ask questions here because my only regret is that we haven't been able to have a celebratory drink due to COVID. This is indeed a really good ruling. And I think we need to prepare for dissolution in the coming year, because I believe this year there is agreement on the division of revenue, and the circumstances don't call for that. But the one thing, when we were running the campaign last year, we were struck that the general public had very little sympathy for the counties. And they kind of were saying, why are we giving them more money? They're just going to eat it. Not really getting the gist of this big confrontation. What's your take on that? What have counties done or not done to support their case in the division of revenue, much as the court has given them a thumbs up?
I think there are challenges. One is that in terms of expectations and delivery, don't forget that counties and devolved governments came in, and people had very, very high expectations on them, and of course they were going to be disappointed. Primarily because in terms of capacity, I think sometimes we forget that the amount of money that is actually released to the counties, probably 70% of it is purely for recurrent expenditure. It's for buying drugs, it's for paying salaries, it's for the amount of money that is left for development is very, very little. So in terms of what people expect counties to accomplish in terms of development and what they're able to accomplish, even if they were running effectively, even if they had people of integrity, it will still be a disappointment. So that's number one. But number two is that also there has been disappointment in terms of quality of delivery of services. The truth of the matter is, even with the little money that is there, counties could have done a lot better to excite the public in terms of the need to therefore allocate them more, because even with the little, they are doing some. Now, of course, there are examples here and there where some countries have done pretty well. And I think the problem is that the negative story shines a lot stronger, and it's a lot louder, of course, than the work and that's only normal, that's only natural. But the truth of the matter is that if you are to go around this country, and I've been to 40, I think the only country I've not been to is Mandera. I've been to all the others. There is no question that outside Nairobi, because I think Nairobi has been a disaster in every respect, and part of it also has to go with the amount of money available for the services for Nairobi, but also a dysfunctional county. But that's a different story. If you go outside of Nairobi, you will find, if you go to West Pokot, if you go to the Bongomas, you will still find the presence of the county government is a lot stronger than the presence of the national government before devolution. Number three is the question of corruption. The truth of the matter is that the corruption in the county may be small, but it's more obvious. It's louder, So I think sometimes we forget that the reason why Kenyans are aware about corruption in county government, it's not because it's more, but it's because it is louder. It's more evident. It's more evident. It's in your face. You're aware. The national government can disappear with 300 billion shillings, and you would never know. But if you go to my county and you do a parking for 30 million shillings instead of the one that was done by the neighboring county at 20 million, people will know.
Somebody's going to know.
And so people, people will know. So that means that it is louder, it is more obvious, and that's a good thing. Because then it means that people then hold local governments accountable better. The problem is that the narrative that has then been created is that corruption is actually bigger in the counties. That is a lie. In fact, if you do shilling for shilling, if you take the audit report, leave alone media reports, if you take the audit report and do shilling for shilling and say, what is the amount of money that has been reported as misspent in the county government, and then compare that with the national government, one national government ministry is capable, has in terms of volume, will have more questions aggregated. I mean, versus the counties aggregated.
Yeah.
Right.
But you will not hear, because if you hear the Ministry of Health has lost 50 billion shillings, it doesn't look like it's a big thing, or 20 billion.
Yeah.
But a county that loses 1 million, 2 million, because if you look at the numbers in the audit reports for county government, they're usually small figures. It doesn't make them right. It doesn't say that that's right. But just means in terms of narrative, the story has been that the counties in any case are very, very corrupt. The solution, Wanjiru, is not to say therefore take the money back to the national government, because that is where a lot of the rot is. It is to say, what is it that we need to do to ensure that the counties are accountable? It is not to take the money back to the big hole that it's been for the last 50 years. It is to say, let us create better systems of accountability in the counties. Let us empower people, because the people in the counties are a lot more able to hold government to accountable than the ones in Nairobi. The governor lives in the county, or at least visits the county regularly. The MCAs live in the neighborhood. The CECs, the ministers, are there. The county headquarters are there. The governors and their officers drive to work every morning through the county. So it is much easier to interact with them and hold them accountable. Instead of a minister who lives in a Harambe House or Ministry of Water, you will never interact with those people. Even if you have questions, where do you take them? Wanjiru can write an op-ed, but the rest of Kenyans, what do they do?
There you go.
So I think we need to see the context in which we this narrative about corruption. My problem with it is not that people say there's corruption, but what they then provide as a solution.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kamotho, you mentioned something, I mean, as you went through this, and just talking about the split, whereby we're looking at a majority of a budget that goes towards recurrent expenditure vis-a-vis development. And for a country that's clamoring to reach economic development, or at least hold on to its tail, it seems to me that things should then be reversed. And I know that you've talked about this previously, even in this room, we've had this conversation with you. And I know you have made suggestions, but it doesn't seem to make sense to quite a number of people that 70 to 80% of a budget goes towards recurrent expenditure. How can it practically change? Because here are people on the ground who are baying for roads, baying for a properly buffered health system, an education system, transport networks, etc., whereas most of the money that is budgeted for is going to anything but that. How can that actually be made different?
The truth of the matter is that we do need to rationalize the public service, and that is not just the public service in the national government, but also in the counties. About 6 or so, I think about five or so years ago, there was an effort done to rationalize. I think it was read by the SRC to rationalize particularly the staff situation in the county government. Because don't forget, what happened is that when the counties came into office, one, they inherited the local government workers. And don't forget that the local government workforce was very bloated.
Yes.
So that was number one. Number two, when county governments came up, part of the reason why people devolved was they needed their people employed. That's the reality. If you went to Narok, they wanted the people of Narok employed by government. And that is why they wanted the county government. And the county government is a political institution. So obviously, they also employed people. And not forgetting that there were already people who are sitting. So then the national government itself, it had its own workers who are working in the devolved ministry, the Ministry of Water. The Ministry of Water had staff in Narok County who are working in the Ministry of Water there. So the county government ended up inheriting the national government, the national level staff, the local authority staff, and then the people they themselves employed. So you have very huge bloated workforce in the county government, and that is a reality, and that is something that needs to be worked on collectively by the national government and the county government, because it's also very difficult to send people home. Employment is a very heated political question. To send people home means that you need to look for some money to send them away. You know, where is that money going to come from when you don't have even enough to survive? So there's a big problem there. But the other side is that recurrent expenditure is not just salary. Recurrent expenditure is also drugs. It is those inputs for agriculture. Those things that we pay regularly. And that take a significant portion of the monies that go to the county government. But I totally agree with you that it doesn't make sense that in a country that really needs to be developing, that we are spending more and more money in paying salaries. Sometimes not necessarily for people who are delivering. You know, if you're paying salaries and people are delivering, then it will be okay. But if you're paying for people, some are ghost workers, some are people where there's overemployment, there's underemployment, and a lot of under delivery. If we are not, if that's what we are doing, then of course there is a problem.
So how shall we ever get out of this, Kamotho? So one, you've given us, yes, the best thing, the ideal thing would be to trim the workforce, but then come to the reality of the politics behind it. How can we then get out of this quagmire?
And Kamotho, just can I add on to that question around the labor force? Because at some point there was a discussion about this 70-30 split, about 30% going to recurrent expenditure, saying that teachers, healthcare workers, and let's say extension workers and such are very vital for service delivery. And this 70-30 might make sense at the national level, where the national government has primarily a policy making and regulatory, not even regulatory, this kind of oversight role. But when you're talking about deepening service delivery up to the village level, if possible,
the worker bees
is this 70-30 really realistic? And this links to the fact that functions weren't really costed, and the cost of delivering effective services and the number of staff that are required to deliver weren't really costed. And we seem to be then caught up with a measure that was put in the law, but doesn't really speak to the reality. And maybe what we are fed up with is inefficiency and people being hired because they are not competent. I don't think there's anyone who's arguing that we could do with more healthcare workers, more clinical workers. We want our nurses well paid. So are we talking about the right thing when we talk about salaries really at this 30-70?
In fact, that's what I'm saying, that the issue is actually not whether it is 70. The issue is that what are we spending that money on? Because even if we spend 100%, but it is for people that are delivering services to Kenyans, that would be okay. The problem now is that if you go, and there's a report done, I can't remember what that process was, the CAPS process, the rationalization of the public service. I think that's what it was called, the CRPS, which was then stopped in court, unfortunately. The reason for that was to ask the question, who are the staff we need to provide an effective public service?
Yes.
What do we need to pay them? Who do we need to retire? Who do we need to send home? Who do we need to retrain? Where are we having duplicated services? That was really to answer that question, because until we resolve that question, the reality is that there are significant amounts of money that we are using for the wrong reason. And that is something that needs to be rationalized early enough. And then we can be able to say, look, even though we are paying a lot of money for salaries, we actually should be paying a lot more in this aspect of this public service. Maybe we are paying a lot more for bureaucrats who just sit in offices. We should be putting more money. We should be reducing the money on that side and paying more money to the delivery of services for agricultural extension workers. So that conversation about rationalizing the public service for effective service delivery, because that really is the question. That is the question that has not been resolved. And that has implications, because then it means, and that's what I'm saying, that it means that once you do that, you're going to find you have a significant number of people that you do need to let go. But those people are legitimate and legally hired, and you do need them to provide the resources to do that. And once that point was reached, then it became a hot potato. So the reality is we need to rationalize. And that rationalization would then mean that we can then be putting more money in development. And development, by the way, includes the provision of services, particularly in those essential services.
Let's take another short break, Kamotho, at 21 minutes to 8 o'clock. Take a look at traffic. And then this conversation continues. On the line with us is governors actually going on the streets and demonstrating and doing a walk from going all the way to the courts. This was something big. So they went to court, the COG. The others who were party to this were the Commission on Revenue Allocation, which was being represented by lawyer Kamotho Waiganjo. He's just told us that the Supreme Court came out and said, you know what, there are a couple of things that you need guys to sort out. Follow the Constitution. And this is what the Constitution says. And also, in some cases, clearing the air. So, with that background, that's why we're now having this conversation with Kamotho. And just before we went to the break, we were discussing the issue of a bloated workforce in both levels of government, especially focusing on the counties.
Kamotho, you spoke earlier about, looking at then citizens being the ones who could be actors when, if, decisions are not made at a certain level, to then look at something like the dissolution of parliament, right? And then to know that a certain level of comprehension is necessary of these factors that are playing out here, because nobody's just going to rock up and go to court, right? Or appear at the Supreme Court. There must be a comprehension of this. And I often find that for you to see what a situation should be, then allows you to understand what you're really dealing with when that situation is not. So if we want to look at counties, for example, if counties were to be able to have the allocation that they should, what kind of pictures would we be looking at? What should the situation be in the country so that people can understand this is what actually it should be? So when you're served with what it is not, then you know what to go and clamor for. So how would you paint a picture from county to county in the country? What should actually be happening when they receive the allocation that is due to them?
Okay. The reality is that there is a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of citizen awareness, because the reality is that citizens always don't make a distinction between who does what in the county government. So they're not always aware. Sometimes if the main highway has a problem, you'll find citizens demonstrating against the county government. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of awareness, so that people understand the respective responsibilities of each level of government. But there are certain functions that exclusively, or largely, almost exclusively belong to counties. Functions like water, like the provision of water services, the provision of health, the agricultural services. In those areas, counties that have livestock issues, again, those are issues of market, issues of parking spaces, those are issues that belong exclusively to county governments. And Mwananchi should be able to see a difference in terms of the services as they were before devolution to where they are now. Kenyans need to be able, county governments, responsible county governments need to be able to explain how they are spending money in each of these services. And they need to be able to show the respective benefits that Mwananchi is getting from county governments getting allocated these resources. People need to see that they have a more effective access to agricultural extension services, the demonstration farms. People need to see that increasingly, even if it's not immediately, more and more people are getting access to water. If it's in the livestock areas, you need to see more water pumps. You need to see more boreholes so that Kenyans increasingly are getting better and better services over time. If you're talking about health, people need to see that you have health centers, not health centers in every other ward, and effective health centers that have medicine, that have nurses, that have doctors. That is what people need to see. And there are places, you will go, and if you compare, and I think the problem with the human being has a very short memory. The biblical story of people who said we want to go back to Egypt, where we were eating onions and garlic, is very real.
Yeah.
If people are to remember the situation in 2010, in terms of health services, and the situation now, if you go around the country, it's a completely different story. It's a completely different story. You go to the people of Kapenguria and tell them you want to go before 2010, they would skin you alive because they have seen. They have seen. And when they don't have services, they know where to go. They may not always get the answers, but unfortunately, people, when they sit down at the mercy of hoping some minister comes from there, no, they don't have to. They don't have to eat for that time. They have Governor Lonyangapu. So in a sense, what we are saying is that the county governments have a huge responsibility also to ensure that the services that Kenyans that were devolved by the Constitution are seen, in terms of service delivery to the public. The problem with it, and I think that's the unfortunate situation about the division of revenue process, is that I talked about the fact that effective allocations have gone down. Last year, between 2018 and 2019, 2020, the allocation to county governments increased below inflation. The increase was below inflation. Now, I don't know that people understand what that means. What it means is that for the same amount of money that you've been allocated this year, you cannot offer the same service because inflation is at a higher rate than the amount that it's like your salary. You know, if you have an increase in your salary at 2%, but the inflation is at 7%, basically your salary has been reduced effectively. That is what actually happened to the counties last year, and that is the threat that was going to be there but for this ruling. What it essentially means that even the counties that are forward-looking and are doing some work, effectively they can't. And that is what citizens need to understand. That way, they can then demand, because citizens need to be able to continue demanding for more money to the county government. But also, once they have done that, we then need to create mechanisms to ensure that we don't have pilferage at the county government, and to ensure that the problems that we have at the national government in terms of huge losses of money are not replicated in the county government. And when they do, that people are held accountable. Right. So that really is those are the linkages we need to have in terms of citizen empowerment, not just in terms of going to demand for more funds to come to the county governments from the national government, from the national past, but also to ensure that once the money has come, the services are being delivered. And if they are not delivered, what mechanisms exist to hold the government accountable to deliver that service?
Yeah, Kamotho, it's great to have you on and to hear you speak. And of course, it's been quite a journey. It's very difficult implementing devolved government, devolved services when you have a national government that's really competing at every stage. And you know, they say devolution is always contested, but I don't know whether this is the case in other countries. What, in your view, is the contribution of this ruling with regard to the resources that will go to counties? Because we've seen the COVID epidemic, the scourge on the country, and we've seen that the most affected sectors are those in the care of the counties: health service provision, agriculture vis-a-vis food production. And in fact, even if you look at the informal sector, a lot of the informal sector is regulated under the counties. So counties are still pretty poorly resourced. How do you think this particular ruling is going to help to turn that tide so that Kenyans can really get the benefits of proper devolution?
I think the most critical component of these rulings is that it equalizes the bargaining powers, the negotiating powers at both levels. The Senate exists to negotiate for the counties. Until this ruling, it was entirely powerless, because it could be ignored. The CRA exists to ensure you have a technical input in this process. Until this ruling, it was completely ignored. What this ruling does, it is not so much whether it will give more or less. It is that it will ensure that the two parties are negotiating from a point of some level, not absolute, some level of equality. And that therefore means that the rational expectation is that more money should then be allocated where it is needed. Where it is needed. Whatever is available should be allocated, more of it should be allocated where it is needed. And that conversation has not always happened. The national government has started from the process that this is the amount that it needs. And then if there is whatever else is available can be given to counties. Now what we are saying is that we look at the entire past there, and then we both agree, what do you need, what do I need, in relation to the services that I'm delivering. One then hopes that leads to more money going to the county government. This COVID season presents both an opportunity but also is a challenge for county government, because what you have seen is that there's been a huge move towards quite a bit of recentralization. Even in the health sector, especially the health sector, where this pandemic has affected the most. The health services are completely devolved, 100%, other than the referral hospitals. But you don't sense that the role of the counties in this process, ensuring that they are being given effective participation in the process. It is not obvious. What you have seen is huge allocations from various development partners to the national government. and the national government then makes decisions. And that makes sense in the context that we're in the context of an emergency. But I think we would have had a more effective process if we sat down and said, listen, the responsibility of health service provision is county governments. How do we ensure that they are part of this decision making effectively, so that we use this as a training process of knowing how to really develop? It is not an opportunity to re-centralize more, so that you re-centralize procurement, and then when you buy things, you deliver them to the counties. But why is it that we cannot say that, look, we have 8 billion shillings for buying emergency equipment? You sit down with the county government. This is what each county government needs. This is what we need to do. Let the county government spend, because ultimately, these are the people who will be held accountable. If there is a COVID outbreak in Murang'a County, where I come from, we will hold the governor accountable. We will not hold the CS accountable because he's the one we know who delivers services. But the truth of the matter is, other than the little money that the county government has raised from initial budget, the county governments are not involved in this process effectively. So what we are saying is that there's a risk of greater decentralization through this process. And yet what this gave us is an opportunity to actually empower county governments to deliver the services for which they exist, and therefore to be held accountable by the people.
What are the opportunities for that dialogue, consultation, cooperation, intergovernmental coordination under the present political context? It's
a difficult one. The reality is that the Supreme Court decision presents an opportunity for that. Do we have the wherewithal to do it?
Yep.
That's a question that will have to be answered. That really is the issue. But there are several institutions that are going to be very, very critical now, which until now have almost been treated as a by the way. One is, of course, the CRA. We forget, and I raised this in the beginning, the Commission of Revenue Allocation, that commission consists of representatives of the major political players, and then it consists of the national government's principal officer on finance. Is a substantive member, the PS Treasury. Which means in that house, you can both, and then all these people are required to be people with technical competence. Which means in that place, that is an objective institution in which a lot of these, before the political questions are answered, they should be able to say, look, looking objectively at where the need is, we believe that the county government should get, because we don't want to be concerned with the politics. You guys can go negotiate the politics once you pass there. But what we think is the amount of money required to deliver effective health services, to deliver effective agricultural services, is X amount of money. This is the amount of money available. This is what we propose. By the time that decision leaves the CRA, it should be more or less agreed, because that's a technical and political organ. Now, there is another institution called the IBEC in which the governor sits. One hopes that institutions like the IBEC also becomes a little more powerful, because this is now a forum for equal negotiations with equal bargaining powers. So that by the time these issues go to the House, the Senate, and the National Assembly, largely the issues have been resolved by parties in a negotiated environment, and we are not now going to see the sort of muscle flexing that has been there between the National Assembly, which sees itself as a protector of the national government, and the Senate that sees itself as a protector of the counties, and the two of them should now be able to negotiate with figures that have been agreed at a boardroom by all the players, and that should ultimately give a more objective proposal.
Very interesting insights that you've given us this morning. Thank you very much for speaking to us, Kamotho Waiganjo.
Asante sana.
And keep doing this, keep pushing for better understanding of our constitution and devolution.
Eric, let me say this before I leave.
Yes.
One of the problems about this conversation is that it is a very silent conversation.
Right.
You know, in fact, your problem was the first media house to give it attention. You know, most would rather, talk about Eldoret, who's doing, a lot of which don't actually, in terms of effective management of the country, in terms of effective benefit for the country. Don't matter much, because it's the same individuals going round and round. These sorts of conversations are so critical, but you don't hear them. And so the public don't actually understand the nuances, the critical nuances that are happening, and why they are not getting services. But they believe the tidbits that come from social media and other places about, this corruption, there's too much money. And sometimes we need create opportunities for effective conversations on these very critical national questions. And I really applaud Spice for doing this. I hope other media houses actually have not just this one, but other critical national conversations away from the politics, which is more exciting. But the things that really change the country are these ones.
Asante sana. Thank you very much.